The morning Anna Atwood rode into Dusty Creek, Texas, in the spring of 1882, every soul in town had something urgent to tell her, and not a single one of those things was welcome news. She had traveled 3 days by stagecoach from San Antonio, and before that a full week by train from Philadelphia, and her back ached and her dress was the color of the red Texas dust that seemed to have worked its way into every fiber she owned. She stepped down from the coach with a carpet bag in one hand and a leather satchel in the other, and she had barely set both feet on the dry, cracked earth of the main street before a woman in a blue calico dress came hurrying toward her with the kind of purposeful stride that announced bad news from 50 yards away. "You must be the new schoolteacher," the woman said, breathless and wide-eyed. "Anna Atwood." "That I am," Anna said, brushing a strand of dark brown hair from her forehead. "I am Mabel Greer. My husband owns the general store." She grabbed Anna's arm with a grip that was entirely too firm for a first introduction. "I need to warn you about something before you take another step toward the Kendrick ranch." Anna looked at the woman calmly. She was 26 years old, had taught school in 2 cities before this one, and had developed over those years a certain patience with people who believed the world was ending. "What about the Kendrick ranch?" she asked. Mabel Greer pulled her closer, as though someone might overhear, though the street held only a few horses tied to hitching posts and a boy rolling a hoop in the dust. "Roscoe Kendrick," she said, lowering her voice to the conspiratorial register of someone who had been waiting a long time to deliver this particular speech. "That man has broken 3 contracts and 2 promises, 3, and the women who made those agreements left this town either crying or furious, and one of them threw a cast iron skillet at his head from the 2nd-story window of the hotel before she departed." Anna considered this. "Why would I be going to the Kendrick ranch?" Mabel blinked. "Well, the school is on his land. He donated the building. He has been the primary benefactor of the schoolhouse for the past 4 years, and every teacher we have had has boarded at the ranch house." Anna looked down the street to where a small white building was just visible at the far end of town, beyond the livery stable and the blacksmith shop. "And I presume those arrangements came with some kind of formal agreement." "Every single one," Mabel said gravely. "Contracts even, written, signed, witnessed, and he broke them. Not the teachers, mind you, him. Roscoe Kendrick broke every last one." Anna shifted her carpet bag to her other hand and offered Mabel Greer a small, composed smile. "Well, Mrs. Greer, I appreciate your concern. But I have not sent any contract ahead of me, and I am not arriving here with any promises to make or break. I sent only a letter of introduction to the school board and a letter to the rancher explaining my qualifications and my intention to begin teaching the first Monday of May. Nothing more." Mabel stared at her. "You have no contract with him? None at all? No promises? Not a one?" Mabel seemed genuinely disoriented by this. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then opened it again. "But you still plan to board at the ranch?" "I plan to sleep somewhere tonight," Anna said pleasantly, "and the letter I received from the school board said the arrangements had been made. So I suppose I will walk over there and see what arrangement that turns out to be, and then I will go from there." She picked up her satchel, nodded politely to Mabel Greer, and walked toward the far end of Dusty Creek, Texas, while behind her she could hear the woman already calling out to someone across the street to tell them what had just happened. The schoolhouse was exactly as small as it looked from a distance, but it was clean and well built, with a real wooden floor and 4 glass windows that caught the afternoon light in a way that made Anna think the space could be made genuinely lovely with a little effort. She spent several minutes walking through it, noting the worn benches, the blackboard with its ghost of old lessons still faintly visible in the chalk dust, the globe on the teacher's desk that was slightly dented on one side. It was a good room. She already liked it. The ranch house was a 1/4 mile beyond the school, set back from the road by a long dirt path that cut between 2 paddock fences. The paddocks held horses on one side and cattle on the other, and the air smelled of hay and leather, and the particular dry warmth of late spring in Texas. The house itself was larger than she had expected, 2 stories of solid timber construction with a covered porch that ran the full length of the front, and everything about it said money spent carefully rather than money spent to impress. She knocked on the door. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then she heard boot steps on a wooden floor, unhurried and heavy, and the door swung open. Roscoe Kendrick was not what she had expected, and she would have been hard-pressed to say exactly what she had expected, since she had been told very little about him, beyond the fact that he had a talent for breaking agreements. He was perhaps 32 or 33, tall in the way that men who spend their lives outdoors tend to be tall, which is to say not just in height but in the broad solidity of his shoulders and the ease with which he filled a doorframe. His hair was dark and slightly too long, pushed back from a face that was sun-darkened and angular, and currently set in an expression she could only describe as resigned. He looked at her, and then he looked at the carpet bag in her hand, and then he looked back at her face. "Miss Atwood," he said, "it was not a question." "Mr. Kendrick," she said. It was not a greeting so much as an acknowledgement. He stepped back from the door. "You had better come in." The interior of the house was spare and practical, the way working ranches tended to be, with good furniture and no frills and a fireplace large enough to heat the whole ground floor. He led her to a sitting room off the main hall and gestured at a chair, which she sat in, and then he stood near the window with his arms crossed and looked at her with an expression she was starting to identify as his default mode, which appeared to be something between wariness and reluctant courtesy. "I expect someone in town already told you," he said. "About the 3 contracts and 2 promises," she said. "Yes, Mrs. Greer was very thorough." He uncrossed his arms and then crossed them again. "I suppose you want to renegotiate." "Renegotiate what?" Anna said. "I have nothing to renegotiate. I sent a letter. You sent a letter back, or your ranch foreman did on your behalf, indicating that the school would be ready and that there was a room available for boarding. That is all we have between us. No contract, no promises." He looked at her with an expression she could not immediately read. "That is unusual." "I imagine it is, given your history," she said pleasantly. "I am not unusual. I simply do not make formal agreements with people I have not yet met. It seems presumptuous." Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, but a reduction in the wariness. "The other teachers sent contracts. That was their choice. You are not bothered by what you were told. I am bothered that 4 teachers apparently left this town in some form of distress," she said, and her voice was steady but carried a genuine seriousness that made him look at her differently. "I would like to know what actually happened if you are willing to tell me. Not because I am making judgments about it before I hear it, but because I am going to be living and working here, and I prefer to understand the situation I am walking into." He was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled a chair from near the fireplace and sat down across from her, which she took as a good sign, since it meant he had stopped hovering. "The first contract was with a Miss Clara Webb," he said, 3 years ago. "She was to teach the school and board here, and I agreed to keep the premises in good repair and provide board and meals. I broke that agreement because I hired a new ranch cook without consulting her, and she had written into the contract that she would approve all household staff. I did not read the contract carefully enough. She left." "All right," Anna said. "The second was a Mrs. Hargrove, a widow. She had stipulated in her contract that no cattle drives would operate within a certain distance of the schoolhouse during school hours. I had a drive go through that route in October of that year because the South Pass had washed out in a storm. I did not notify her in advance. She was 2 months into her contract. She left. And the third," he looked out the window for a moment, "a Miss Delaney. Her contract specified that the room she was to board in would be on the west side of the house, because the east side faced the corrals and was noisy in the mornings. My sister came to stay for an extended visit and took the west room. I put Miss Delaney in the east room and offered her additional compensation. She left." Anna was quiet, processing this. "And the 2 promises," he shifted in his chair. "Those are less formal. The first was a promise to Miss Holloway, who was not a teacher but who I had been courting. I promised to attend her family's Thanksgiving dinner in Austin. A fence line on the North Range broke in a storm 2 days before, and I had 300 head of cattle loose. I did not go. She did not come back. He said this last part without self-pity, which Anna respected. The second promise, he said, and there was something in the way he hesitated that told her this one was different, was to my father before he died. I promised to have the south pasture fenced and the new well dug before the summer of 1879. He died in February of that year, and I was so occupied with the grief and the management of the estate that I did not finish either project until the following year. He never saw it done. The room was very quiet. Outside, a horse moved in the paddock, and somewhere further off, a man was calling to another man about something to do with the hay. That one was not a broken promise, Anna said. That was grief. He looked at her. The result was the same. The result was the same, she agreed, but the cause was different, and the cause matters. You were not careless with your father, you were overwhelmed. There is a distinction. He studied her for a long moment. You are direct, he said. I find it saves a great deal of time, she said. He almost smiled. It was the smallest movement at the corners of his mouth, barely there and gone quickly, but Anna Atwood noticed it the way you notice a lamp lit in a window when you have been riding in the dark. Your room is upstairs, he said, standing. West side. She stood as well. I appreciate that. He picked up her carpet bag before she could and carried it to the stairs, and she followed with her satchel, and neither of them spoke again that evening. But the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes not from having nothing to say, but from understanding that what needs to be said will wait until the right moment. The room was clean and bright, with a narrow bed and a writing desk, and a window that looked out over a sweep of land that turned gold in the last of the evening light. Anna stood at that window for a long time after she heard his boot steps descend the stairs. The land went on, and the sky above it was enormous and very blue, and she thought that whatever came next, at least the world around it would be beautiful. She started teaching the following Monday, as she had said she would. There were 14 children in the school, ranging from 6 to 14 years of age, and they came in from the ranches and homesteads around Dusty Creek with the variety of preparation and temperament that you would expect from any 14 children brought together under one roof. Some of them could read well, and some could barely manage their own names. 2 of the older boys had the look of children who had been told by someone that school was a waste of their time, and they sat in the back with their arms crossed in unconscious imitation of Roscoe Kendrick, which made Anna want to smile, but she did not, because you do not win over resistant children by smiling at them from across the room. You win them over by making the work interesting, and that was something she knew how to do. She had been teaching for 3 days when the first unexpected thing happened. She was at the blackboard working through a long division problem with the older children when the door of the schoolhouse opened and Roscoe Kendrick walked in with a load of firewood in his arms, which he carried to the wood box by the stove without acknowledging that he had interrupted anything. He set the wood down, brushed the bark from his shirt, and turned to leave, and then he stopped. "Are you teaching them division?" he said. "I am," she said. "Tom Briggs," he said, looking at one of the resistant boys in the back row, "could not make change from $1 last month when I sent him to the general store. He gave away 30 cents that was not his to give." Tom Briggs, who was 12 and deeply embarrassed by this public accounting, turned red to the tips of his ears. "Then Tom Briggs will be an expert at making change by the end of the month," Anna said, not unkindly, and she looked at Tom Briggs directly as she said it. "Which means he will be useful in ways that most people his age are not yet. That is worth the effort." Tom Briggs uncrossed his arms. It was a small thing, but Anna noticed it, and she suspected that Roscoe Kendrick noticed it too, because the almost smile came back to the corners of his mouth before he went out the door and pulled it shut behind him. After school that day, she walked back to the ranch house and found him on the porch working a piece of leather harness with an awl, and she sat in the other porch chair that was clearly there for someone to sit in, even though the impression she had gotten from the house was that not many people used it. "You are good with them," he said, without looking up from the harness. "Some of them," she said. "Tom Briggs is still deciding." "Tom's father does not see the value in schooling," Roscoe said. "His father barely reads himself and does not see why his son should be any different." "That is a common enough attitude," Anna said. "But Tom will make change from $1 before the month is out. After that, his father may think differently." Roscoe worked the awl through the leather with the careful attention of a man who does things properly. "Where did you teach before this?" "Dallas, before that Galveston," she said. "Before that I was in Philadelphia, where I grew up. My father was a schoolteacher and my mother taught piano. They are both gone now." "I am sorry." "My mother 2 years ago, my father 4 years before that," she said. "It was not sudden with either of them." There was time to say what needed to be said. He looked at her then briefly. "That is a mercy." "Yes," she agreed, "it is." They sat in the quiet for a while, and the evening came in slowly across the land, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called out and was not answered. Roscoe set the harness aside and looked out at the paddock where one of his mares was moving along the fence line in that restless way horses have near supper time. "I am aware," he said carefully, "that my reputation in this town is not entirely favorable." "Mabel Greer made that clear," Anna said. "I want you to know that I do not make a habit of negligence," he said. "The contracts those women wrote were detailed documents, and in each case I failed in a specific way that I could have avoided with more care. I do not offer that as an excuse." "I did not ask you for one," she said. "I know you did not," he said. "I am offering it anyway because I would like you to stay, and I think honesty is more useful than pretending the history does not exist." She looked at him steadily. The evening light made his face easier to read than it was in the direct afternoon sun, and what she read there was not charm or calculation but something more straightforward, something she might call earnestness if pressed. "I appreciate that," she said, "and I intend to stay. For as long as the school needs me and the work is good, I intend to stay." He nodded slowly. "Good." She went inside after that, and he stayed on the porch a while longer, and neither of them mentioned the conversation again for some time. But it had been said, and it lay between them like a foundation stone, invisible but load-bearing. May became June, and the Texas heat settled over Dusty Creek like a heavy hand, and the children came to school sweating and restless, but they came, and Anna taught them with the windows thrown wide and the door propped open, and a pitcher of water on the corner table that was refilled 3 times a day. Tom Briggs mastered making change by the 14th of May, exactly as she had said he would, and when she told his father at the end-of-month gathering she organized for the families, the man's face did something complicated and he did not say much. But the following Monday Tom Briggs came to school with a new pencil that was clearly not a hand-me-down, and Anna considered that a victory. The ranch itself was a working thing, always in motion, and living on it meant being constantly aware of it even when you were not directly involved. Anna learned the rhythms of it without meaning to. She knew that the hand started work before the sun was fully up, and that the sound of horses being led from the stable was the alarm clock she did not need. She knew that Roscoe went out to the North Range on Tuesdays and Thursdays and was back by midday. She knew that Friday afternoons he did accounts at the desk in the study off the main hall, and that the door was always closed, and that he did not like to be interrupted during that time, which she had learned not because anyone told her but because she had once knocked on that door with a question about a leaking pipe, and he had answered with a brevity that bordered on curtness, and when he saw her face he had the grace to look regretful. "I apologize," he said later that evening on the porch. "Friday afternoons are a poor time." "I noticed," she said without any particular heat in it. "The ranch accounts are not simple," he said. "My father managed them in his head mostly." "I need paper." "Most people do," she said. He looked at her. "Could you look at them, the accounts, I mean? If you are willing, You are a teacher of arithmetic. I am an adequate rancher but a poor bookkeeper." She was surprised by the request, but she said yes, and the following Friday the door to the study stood open, and she sat across the desk from him with ledger books spread between them, and she found 3 errors in the first half hour that had been accumulating interest in the wrong direction for the better part of a year. He looked at the corrections she made with a pencil in the margin, and said something under his breath that she chose to interpret as gratitude. "You have been overpaying Hartley's feed by $1.20 a month since January," she said. "That is $14.40 you are owed." "I will speak to Hartley," he said, "and your hay contract with the Patterson farm renews in August. You should renegotiate it. The rate you agreed to 3 years ago is higher than the current market." He looked at her steadily. "How do you know the current market rate for hay?" "I asked the men in the stable," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "You asked my ranch hands about hay prices." "I asked your ranch hands about hay prices, and the price of grain, and the going rate for hiring a fencing crew, and the average cost of a new well in this part of Texas," she said. "I am curious about how things work. I always have been." He sat back in his chair and looked at her in a way that was different from the way he had looked at her before. There was something open in it now, something that had not been there in the first weeks, a quality of genuine attention rather than careful assessment. "Your father must have been a remarkable man," he said. She smiled, and it was a real smile, full and warm, the kind she did not give out casually. "He was," she said. "He believed that the most interesting person in any room is almost never the most obvious one." Roscoe Kendrick looked as though that thought was working its way through him like water through dry ground. "He was right," he said quietly, and he was not talking about the room in general, and they both knew it, and neither of them said anything more about it. And when they finished with the accounts and she rose to leave, he said good night in a voice that was different from the way he had been saying good night for the past 6 weeks. There was more in it. She heard the more, and she carried it upstairs with her like a lamp. The summer brought a visitor. His name was Franklin Dearborn, and he arrived in July in a good coat and a clean hat, and with the bearing of a man who considers himself significant, which Anna had encountered enough times to recognize at once. He was from Austin, a land agent of some kind, and he came to the ranch to speak with Roscoe about something that Roscoe did not immediately explain to Anna, and that she did not ask about, since it was not her business. But Dusty Creek was a small town, and Franklin Dearborn was not a subtle man, and by the end of his second day, the nature of his visit had reached Anna through a chain of sources that started with the ranch foreman, whose name was Pete Calloway, and ended with Mabel Greer, who collared Anna on the porch of the general store and told her that Franklin Dearborn was attempting to purchase the eastern portion of the Kendrick land for a railroad spur. Anna took this information home and thought about it while she graded papers. It did not surprise her that someone wanted the land. The eastern quarter of the Kendrick Range was the best-watered portion, running along a creek that never quite dried up even in August, and the grasses there were thick and the ground was level. Anyone building a railroad spur would want that ground. What surprised her, when she thought about it more carefully, was that Roscoe had not mentioned it. Not because he owed her an explanation, but because in the weeks since the Friday afternoon account session, they had developed a habit of talking in the evenings on the porch, and the conversations had grown longer and wider, covering the school and the ranch and the town and the price of beef and the state of the Comanche treaties, and the question of whether the railroad was going to change the West for the better or the worse, or just differently. Roscoe Kendrick was not a voluble man, but he had opinions, and they were grounded ones, built from observation rather than received wisdom, and Anna had come to look forward to those conversations in a way that she was not quite ready to examine too directly. She came to the porch that evening and found him there already, and she sat down in her chair and said, "Are you selling the eastern quarter?" He looked at her sideways. "Mabel Greer, among others." He was quiet for a moment. "I am considering it. What does Pete Calloway think?" "Pete thinks I should not." "Why?" He says the eastern quarter is the best watering for the cattle, and that without it I will have to dig 3 new wells and build a water system, and the cost will not be covered by what Dearborn is offering. Anna folded her hands in her lap. Pete is probably right. Roscoe looked at her. You have not heard Dearborn's offer. No, she said. But I know what the eastern quarter is worth, because I have ridden over it twice, and I have read the Hartley hay delivery records, and I know what the water access means for cattle density. And I am quite certain that whatever Dearborn is offering is less than what that land represents in actual operating value. He stared at her for long enough that she wondered if she had overstepped, and then he said, How did you ride over the eastern quarter? I borrowed the brown mare on Saturday mornings, she said. I hope that is all right. It is entirely all right, he said. And then, why? Because I like to understand the places I live in, she said, which was true, and also not the whole truth, since the other part of the truth was that she had come to feel a loyalty to this ranch that she had not expected and could not fully explain, except that it had something to do with the man who ran it, and the way he ran it, which was carefully and honestly and without vanity, the way her father had done everything. Franklin Dearborn stayed 3 days and left without a signed agreement. Roscoe told Anna this on the evening of his departure, and she said that she thought that was the right decision. And he said he thought so too, and that was the end of it, except that he said it while looking at her with that open expression she had begun to watch for, and there was in his eyes something that was not quite gratitude and not quite admiration, but was something warmer than either. July became August, and the heat was extraordinary, the kind of heat that turns the land to a shimmering gold haze and makes every task harder and shorter tempers, and frays the edges of patience. The children came to school anyway. Anna moved the school day earlier, starting at first light and finishing by noon, and she brought a tin of molasses cookies from the ranch kitchen on Fridays, which the children received with the enthusiasm of the genuinely hot and tired, and which Tom Briggs always waited for with a composure that she found endearing, because she could see the effort it cost him. It was in August that she first saw Roscoe Kendrick in a crisis. A section of the north fence came down in the night, and by morning 4 horses and a sizable portion of the cattle herd had walked through it and distributed themselves across 2 neighboring properties. She was at the breakfast table when Pete Calloway came in with his hat in his hand, and his face the color of old brick, and Roscoe put down his coffee cup and went out the door without a word, and by the time Anna looked through the kitchen window he was already on his horse. He was gone all day. She taught school and came home and made coffee and graded her papers on the porch and watched the road, and at 7 in the evening his horse came down the road at a walk that said both horse and rider were done, and he unsaddled the horse himself rather than handing it to the stable hand, which she knew meant he was working through something in his head. She brought him coffee when he came up to the porch, and he sat and drank it without speaking for a full 5 minutes, and she did not push him because she had learned the difference between the silence that wanted company and the silence that wanted interruption. All the horses, he said finally. 4 cattle that we cannot find. Patterson thinks one of them went on to his back 40, but he did not see it himself. The fence, she said. The posts were old, he said. I knew they were old. I had it on the list to replace them this fall. I should have moved it up. He shook his head. The Patterson cattle have been grazing on my north grass for 3 weeks without my knowing it, which means my contract with Patterson needs to be renegotiated, which means another conversation I'm apparently not good at having. She looked at him. You are better at those conversations than you think, she said. You told me the truth about every broken contract and promise the first night I was here, without being asked for more than a brief explanation, and you did it clearly and without excuses. Most people would not have done that. He looked at her. The evening light was in his face and it made him look younger or perhaps less armored, she was not certain which. You are generous, he said. I am accurate, she said. Generous would be telling you it did not matter. I am telling you it did matter and you did it right anyway. He set down the coffee cup and looked out at the land, and she watched him and felt something shift in herself, some weight or guard that she had been carrying without fully acknowledging it, a thing she had constructed over the years of teaching and moving, and starting over in new places, a careful management of how much of herself she put into anything temporary. The thing was, she was not sure this was temporary anymore. She was not ready to say that out loud, but she thought it, sitting on that porch in the heat of the Texas August, and it was a thought that surprised her with its own certainty. Pete Calloway was a man of 50 with a gray mustache and the quiet authority of someone who has been trusted for a long time and has never abused it. He had worked the Kendrick Ranch for 22 years, first under Roscoe's father and then under Roscoe himself, and he regarded Roscoe with a mixture of loyalty and exasperated affection that reminded Anna of how a good older brother might regard a younger one who kept doing things right, but with unnecessary difficulty. Pete and Anna had become something like friends, or the frontier version of it, which meant they had genuine conversations when their paths crossed, and they trusted each other's assessments of things. He stopped her one morning in September on her way to the school with a look on his face that she recognized as the look he wore when something was on his mind that he was trying to decide whether to say. She made it easy for him. "What is it, Pete?" He adjusted his hat. "I want to ask you something that is none of my business." "Go ahead," she said. "Are you planning to stay?" he asked. "Not just through the school term. Are you planning to be here?" She was quiet for a moment. "Why are you asking?" He looked at the schoolhouse and then at the ranch house and then at her, and the whole arc of his gaze said everything the words were not saying. "Because that man in there has been running this ranch alone for 6 years since his father died, and he is good at it, but he is not good at people in the way the ranch needs him to be. He is getting better." He paused. "You are why he is getting better." Anna pressed her lips together. "Pete." "I know," he said. "None of my business." "I said so from the start." He put his hat back square on his head. "I just think you should know it, whatever you decide." She walked to the school with that in her chest, and she taught 14 children with full attention and full heart, and all day it sat with her, that small piece of information, and she turned it over and looked at it from all sides the way she turned over any problem she wanted to understand fully. By evening she had not resolved it, but she had done something better than resolve it. She had admitted to herself, quietly and without ceremony, that she did not want to leave. Not the school, not the town, and not the porch where they sat in the evenings, and not the man who sat beside her on it. September was when the second unexpected thing happened. A woman came to Dusty Creek on the Wednesday stage, and she went directly to the Kendrick Ranch, and her name was Violet Dearborn, and she was the sister of Franklin Dearborn, the land agent who had tried to buy the eastern quarter in July. She was 24 years old and very pretty in the kind of deliberate way that suggests considerable effort, and she came with a letter from her brother addressed to Roscoe Kendrick, proposing a business partnership that would involve Roscoe's land and Franklin's capital, and a cattle venture of significant scale. Anna learned this from Pete, who learned it from the ranch cook, whose name was Doris and who had prepared coffee and biscuits for the visitor and formed strong opinions about her in the space of 40 minutes. Roscoe told Anna about it that evening, because by September they told each other things. It had become the norm without being declared so. "She is apparently here to represent her brother's interests," he said, in the careful tone of a man who is aware that he is navigating something. "He has proposed a partnership that would involve a joint cattle operation. He provides the capital, I provide the land and the expertise." "And Miss Dearborn is here to persuade you?" Anna asked. "That appears to be the intent," he said, and he said it with a kind of flat honesty that she appreciated, because he could have been more cagey about it and he was choosing not to be. "What do you think of the proposal itself?" she asked. "The proposal is not without merit," he said. "The capital would let me expand the herd by 1/3 and repair the north fencing properly and dig the wells I have been putting off. Dearborn is not a dishonest man. His terms are aggressive but not unreasonable." "But," she said, because there was clearly a but. But I have been this ranch's only owner, he said, and I have made every decision on it for 6 years, and I am not certain I want a partner who is not here and whose only investment is money. Then do not take a partner, she said. He looked at her. It would solve a great many problems. Or create new ones, she said. Partnerships create obligations, and obligations create the conditions for broken agreements, and you have had enough of those. He was very still for a moment. You think I should not accept? I think you should decide based on what you actually want the ranch to be, she said, not on what a single summer's cash problems make it seem like. You have been running this ranch through difficulties before. You will have them again. A partner with capital is not a solution to difficulties. It is a trade of one set of problems for another. You should know what you are trading before you sign anything. He was quiet for a long moment. The night had come down fully around them, and the stars over Texas were extravagant, the way they get when the air is clear and dry, and the land is flat enough to let you see the whole sky without interruption. You are the most practical person I have ever met, he said. That is either a compliment or a disappointment, she said. It is the highest compliment I know how to give, he said, and he looked at her when he said it, and the look was the kind that does not require translation. Anna Atwood, who had spent her life being composed and steady and careful about what she let herself want, felt something move in her chest like a bird that had been sitting very still and suddenly decided to take flight. She said nothing, but she also did not look away. Violet Dearborn stayed a week. She was charming and well-dressed, and she clearly found Roscoe Kendrick attractive in the uncomplicated way that some women find tall, quiet, capable men attractive. She made herself pleasant and useful, and she ate supper at the ranch house twice, which Doris the cook managed with the contained displeasure of someone who does not like changes to the table settings. On the 5th day of her visit, Violet found Anna coming out of the schoolhouse at noon and walked alongside her back toward the ranch with the air of someone who has something to say and is working up to saying it. You have been here since May, Violet said. I have, Anna said. You are the school teacher. I am. Violet was quiet for a few steps. Do you like it here? Very much, Anna said. And do you plan to stay? Anna looked at her directly. I do. Violet made a small sound that might have been acknowledgement or might have been something else entirely. My brother's proposal is a good one, she said. I hope Mr. Kendrick will see that. Your brother's proposal is a business matter, Anna said evenly. I imagine Mr. Kendrick will make his decision based on what is best for the ranch. Of course, Violet said, and smiled, and the smile was pleasant and meant absolutely nothing. Roscoe declined the Dearborn partnership 2 days later. He told Franklin Dearborn by letter, politely and specifically, and he told Anna about it on the porch that evening, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has made a decision he is comfortable with. Violet Dearborn left on the Friday stage, and Doris the cook made apple pie for supper that evening, and nobody mentioned the reason, and everybody was aware of it. October came in cool and clear, and the light changed in a way that Anna had not expected from Texas, a long golden quality to the afternoons that made everything look like a painting of itself. The cattle were moved to the south pasture for the winter graze, and the school settled into its autumn rhythm, and Anna turned 27 years old on the 8th of October. She did not mention her birthday to anyone, because she had never been in the habit of making much of it. But somehow Pete Calloway found out, through a channel she never fully traced, and Pete told Doris, and Doris made a cake, and Roscoe came to the porch that evening with the cake on a plate and a look on his face that she could only describe as determined, as though arriving with a birthday cake required the same resolve as making a difficult business decision. "Happy birthday," he said. She looked at the cake, which was chocolate and had been frosted with some ambition, and she looked at him, and she felt the warmth of it move through her so completely that she had to look away for a moment to manage herself. "You did not have to do this," she said. "I know," he said, and sat down and cut the cake into 2 pieces with his pocket knife and handed her the larger one. They ate it in the evening quiet, and after a while he said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it as directly as you answer everything else." She set her plate down and looked at him. All right. He was looking at his own plate. He was, she realized, nervous, which was not a quality she had associated with him before, and the sight of it made her feel something tender and complicated. "Are you content here?" he asked. "Not just with the school here, on this ranch, in this life?" She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "more than I expected to be." He looked up. "When you finish the school term," he said, and then he stopped and started again. "When the year ends, if the board offers you another term, would you accept it?" "Yes," she said. Without hesitation, he absorbed this. "And if I were to ask you to stay for reasons beyond the school," he said, and his voice had a quality she had never heard in it before, careful and exposed at once, "would you be open to that conversation?" Anna Atwood looked at Roscoe Kendrick in the October evening light, and she thought about the 3 contracts and 2 promises, and the woman who had thrown a skillet, and the way he had told her all of it on the first night without being asked more than once. And she thought about Pete Calloway asking if she planned to stay. And she thought about the Eastern Quarter with its good water, and the accounts with their 3 errors, and the Friday afternoons with the study door open, and the evenings on the porch that had grown longer as the weeks went on. She thought about all of it, and then she said, "I would be very open to that conversation." He looked at her, and the look was wide open and unguarded in a way she had not seen before, and it was the most honest thing about him, and she had come to understand that honesty was the core of him, that all the broken contracts had been broken not from malice, but from the kind of practical overwhelm that hits men who are trying to manage too much with too little help. And that what he needed was not a contract or a promise, but a person who understood the difference between an obligation and a choice. "I should tell you," he said, "that I am aware of my reputation." "I know you are," she said, "and I want you to know that I have no intention of breaking anything with you," he said. "Not because I am making a formal agreement, but because you have been here for 5 months, and in that time, you have been the most consistently sensible and interesting and kind presence in my life, and I do not want to mishandle that the way I have mishandled other things." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that she had been thinking since the first day and had never quite said aloud. "Roscoe," she said, using his name, which she had rarely done directly, "I have never asked you for a contract, and I am not making you a promise that requires your compliance. What I am telling you is that I want to be here, and I want the conversation you are describing, and the rest of it we will work out as it comes. That is not a contract. That is just 2 people being honest with each other." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I think that is better than any contract I have seen." She smiled, the full warm smile, and he watched it the way a man watches something he did not quite dare to hope for. And outside the night was clear, and the stars were enormous, and somewhere on the south pasture, his cattle were settled and his land was whole, and she thought that the world at this particular moment was very good. November came, and with it the first real cold, and the school stove worked harder, and the morning rides through the ranch became breath-pluming affairs that Anna found invigorating rather than unpleasant. Roscoe had begun to ride with her on Saturday mornings, not because she had asked him to, but because he appeared at the stable on the 2nd Saturday of October when she was saddling the brown mare, and he had his own horse already bridled, and he had said, "If you are going east, I want to show you the creek in autumn. It is worth seeing." She had gone east, and the creek had been worth seeing, its banks stripped of summer green and replaced with a kind of spare beauty, the water running low and clear over pale stones, and they had sat their horses at the edge of it and looked at it together in the companionable silence that she had come to understand was one of his primary languages. After that, the Saturday morning rides were assumed by both of them without being announced, and they ranged further and further from the ranch as October turned to November, through sections of the property she had not seen, past the old line shack on the northwest boundary, and along the fence line that had been properly replaced after the August incident, and into the higher ground where the cedars grew, and the air smelled of something different from the flat country below. They talked on those rides about everything. She told him about Galveston and the strangeness of teaching in a coastal city where the children came to school with salt in their hair, and their fathers were fishermen, and their mothers mended nets. He told her about his father, a man named Gideon Kendrick who had come to Texas from Georgia in 1860 with $40 and a determination that apparently bordered on the irrational, and who had built the ranch from a single section of land to what it was now by the kind of methodical, unrelenting work that leaves no room for vanity. "He sounds like someone I would have admired greatly," Anna said on one of those mornings. "He would have liked you," Roscoe said. He had no patience for people who talked without thinking and a great deal of admiration for people who thought before they talked, which most people do not do. "Your mother?" she asked, because he rarely mentioned her. He was quiet for a moment. "She left when I was 9, he said. "Not for another man or anything of that kind. She simply could not manage the isolation. She went back to Georgia to her own family, and she died there when I was 20. We exchanged letters, but I did not know her well." "I am sorry," Anna said. "It was a long time ago," he said, "but I think it is why I take isolation seriously. This land is beautiful, but it is not a gentle place to live if you are not suited to it." He looked at her. "You seem suited to it." "I am," she said, and meant it entirely. December arrived, and with it something she had not anticipated. She was in the general store buying ribbon for the school Christmas decorations when Mabel Greer appeared at her shoulder with the expression of someone who has important news and is not entirely certain how it will be received. "I heard," Mabel said, "that you and Roscoe Kendrick have been riding together on Saturdays." "We have," Anna said, examining a spool of red ribbon, "and that you spent considerable time talking on the porch in the evenings." "We do." Mabel leaned closer. "Anna," she said, with the gravity of someone delivering a weather warning, "are you aware of what people are saying?" "I am aware of what people were saying in May," Anna said, setting down the ribbon and looking at Mabel directly. "I am aware of the 3 contracts and 2 promises. I was told about them within 5 minutes of arriving in this town. And I can tell you that I have not sent a contract and I have not made promises, and I have found Mr. Kendrick to be one of the most honest and straightforward men of my acquaintance. What people are saying now is perhaps a different question." Mabel blinked. "They are saying that you are very well suited to each other." Anna was quiet for a beat. "Oh," she said, "and that it would be a very good thing," Mabel continued, warming to her subject now that she had established it was good news rather than warning, "if he were to have someone permanent at that ranch, someone who could manage the household properly and keep those accounts straight and perhaps convince him to repaint the outside of the house, which has needed it for 2 years. Anna picked up the red ribbon again. "The house could use fresh paint," she agreed. "And you will be finishing the school year in May," Mabel said, "and the board will certainly offer you another term, but I suppose the question is what happens between now and then." She gave Anna a look of transparent encouragement. "Has he said anything?" "Mabel," Anna said kindly, "I will tell you when there is something to tell." Mabel appeared satisfied with this, which was more than she deserved, and Anna bought her red ribbon and walked back to the ranch in the cold December air with something warm moving through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. That evening she told Roscoe what Mabel had said, all of it, including the part about the paint, because she had found that the things she told him honestly always went better than the things she considered keeping back. He listened, and when she got to the part about the paint, he looked at the porch railing and then up at the front of the house with the considering expression of a man who has been noticing something for some time but has not quite gotten around to it. "She is right about the paint," he said. "I know," Anna said. He looked at her then, and it was the wide-open look, the unguarded one, and something moved in it that was more than the October conversation and more than the porch evenings and more than anything they had said to each other so far. "Anna," he said, and the way he said her name had the quality of something that had been held carefully for a long time. "Yes," she said. He looked slightly startled. "I have not asked you anything yet." "No," she said, "but I have been answering it for some time." He was quiet for a long moment, and then he did something she had not expected, which was that he laughed. It was a real laugh, full and sudden and startled out of him, and it transformed his face entirely, and she thought it might be the best thing she had seen since she arrived in Dusty Creek in the spring. "Will you?" he said when the laugh had settled, and he said it seriously with the full weight of a man who does not say things lightly. "Marry me?" "Yes," she said, the same way she had said it the first time, clear and without conditions, because she had meant it the first time and she meant it more now. He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand, and it was the first time he had touched her, and his hand was warm and certain, and she thought, this is what it is supposed to feel like. This is what the books were always describing, and they sat there on the porch in the December cold holding hands like two people who have found each other after a long route and are not particularly inclined to let go. They were married in February of 1883 in the small church at the center of Dusty Creek, which was full of people that Anna had not been certain she knew until they all showed up at once. Mabel Greer cried with the satisfaction of a woman who had watched the whole thing from the beginning and was claiming appropriate credit. Pete Calloway stood at the back of the church with his hat in his hands and the expression of a man who had been hoping for exactly this outcome since September. Doris the cook had made 3 different kinds of cake for the reception, which was held at the ranch house, and the children from the school came with their families, and Tom Briggs, who was 13 now and much changed from the resistant boy of the previous spring, spent the entire afternoon trying to look casual about the fact that he had cried during the ceremony. The ceremony itself was performed by the Reverend Alcott, who was a careful man with words, and when he asked Roscoe if he would take Anna Atwood as his wife, Roscoe said yes with the quiet certainty of a man making a decision he has already made 100 times over. And when he asked Anna if she would take Roscoe Kendrick, she said yes with the same warm clarity she brought to everything. And there were no contracts and no promises in the formal sense. Only 2 people choosing each other in front of everyone they knew, which was its own kind of document and its own kind of guarantee. After the wedding, after the guests and the cake and the long evening of conversation and music from Pete Calloway's fiddle, which turned out to be surprisingly accomplished, they stood together on the porch in the February night and looked at the land and the stars. "Well," Roscoe said. "Well," Anna agreed. "It is cold," he said. "It is February in Texas," she said. "It is not supposed to be warm." He put his arm around her, and she leaned into the solid warmth of him. And the land was quiet, and the stars were exactly as extravagant as they had been on the October night when they had said the thing that started all of it. And she thought that she had come to Dusty Creek with a carpet bag and a leather satchel and no contracts and no promises. And she had found something she had not known to look for and could not imagine being without. Spring returned, and with it the second year of the school, and Anna Atwood Kendrick, as she was now, continued to teach the children of Dusty Creek with the same full attention she had brought to it from the beginning, except that she was no longer boarding at the ranch house but living in it, which was a different thing entirely. The house changed with her in it, not dramatically and not all at once, but in the small incremental ways that matter more than dramatic changes. The sitting room acquired curtains. The accounts desk acquired a second chair that matched the first. The kitchen acquired a set of recipe cards from her mother's collection, written in a handwriting that Doris studied with the focused interest of an expert examining another expert's work. The outside of the house acquired a fresh coat of white paint in March, which Roscoe undertook himself with a steadiness that spoke to his nature. And when it was done, he came down the ladder with paint in his hair, and she handed him a cup of coffee, and he accepted it as though the 2 events, the paint and the coffee and the hand delivering it, were exactly the way things were supposed to be. Tom Briggs finished his schooling in the spring term and went to work on the Patterson farm, and on his last day of school, he gave Anna a piece of paper folded in quarters which, when unfolded, turned out to be a letter he had written himself, careful and slightly formal, saying that he had not wanted to come to school when she arrived, and that she had not treated him as though his reluctance was a problem to be corrected, but as though it was simply a position he was entitled to occupy until he decided differently, and that he had decided differently and was grateful for it. She read it twice and folded it back up and put it in the letter box she kept on the writing desk, which held the things she considered worth keeping. June brought news from Philadelphia, from a distant cousin of Anna's father, that there were some books and papers from her father's library that had been waiting for a home, and would she like them sent. She would, and she wrote back saying so. And in July, a crate arrived by stage that turned out to contain not only books, but also a small daguerreotype of her parents that she had not seen since her mother's death and had not expected to see again. She stood in the front room of the ranch house holding it for a long time, and Roscoe came in from outside and saw her standing there and came to look at the image with her, and he said, "They look like people worth knowing." And she said, "They were." And he put his arm around her and they stood there together looking at the two people who had made her. And it was one of those moments that does not announce itself as significant while it is happening, but that you carry with you afterward as one of the true things. The summer of 1883 was hot and long and productive. The north fencing was fully replaced by August, and the two new wells were dug in June and July, and both of them came in good, which Roscoe announced at supper with the contained pleasure of a man who has been worrying about something for a long time and can now stop. Pete Calloway said it called for a celebration, and Doris produced a pie, and the four of them sat around the kitchen table in the ranch house, while the summer evening came in through the open windows. And Anna thought that this was what home felt like. Not any particular place, but this particular group of people sitting around a table at the end of a working day with something good to eat and nothing to hide from each other. It was in September that Anna told Roscoe she was expecting. She told him in the evening on the porch, because that was where they told each other important things, and he was quiet for a long moment, and then he put his face in his hands and sat that way for several seconds, which frightened her briefly, until she realized that his shoulders were shaking not from distress, but from the overrun of something too large for his usual composure. And when he looked up, his face was open and overwhelmed and entirely without its usual guard, and he said, "Anna," in the voice that had all the weight in it, and she took his hands and held them, and he looked at her as though she was the most remarkable thing the land had ever produced, and she thought she would remember the look on his face for the rest of her life. The school needed a teacher for the months she would be unable to continue. The board found a young man from San Antonio named Mr. Ellis, who was 23 and earnest and visibly nervous about taking over the class from a teacher the children loved. And Anna spent 2 weeks with him at the end of the school term, walking him through every child and every particular, which she did thoroughly enough that, when Mr. Ellis took over in January of 1884, he did so with a solid foundation, and the children gave him a reasonable amount of respect, which she considered one of her more important accomplishments. Their son was born in March of 1884, on a Tuesday morning when the first real hint of spring was in the air, and the ranch was beginning its spring business, and Roscoe was present for the whole of it, which was not the universal practice of the time, but was entirely the practice of a man who does not leave things he considers his responsibility. When the baby came and was placed in Anna's arms, red-faced and emphatic about his opinions from the first moment, Roscoe sat beside the bed and looked at both of them with an expression that she could only describe as undone in the best possible way. "He looks like my father," Roscoe said. Anna looked at the small, furious face. "He looks like someone who already has views about things," she said. They named him Gideon, after Roscoe's father, which seemed right in every way, and Gideon Kendrick announced himself to the world with great confidence and did not stop from that point forward. Pete Calloway held the baby for approximately 30 seconds before handing him back with the careful relief of a man who is comfortable with horses and cattle and considerably less certain about infants. But he did it, and he looked at Roscoe afterward and said, "Your father would be very pleased." And Roscoe said, "I know," and that was the whole of it, but it was enough. Anna returned to teaching in the fall of 1884, with Gideon old enough to be managed during school hours by Doris, who had taken to him with the focused competence she brought to everything, and who had apparently decided that teaching him to walk was her personal project, and was pursuing it with considerable determination. The school had grown by 2 students in Anna's absence, which Mr. Ellis had managed admirably, and she came back to a class of 16 with a new appreciation for what the room meant in the life of the town. Dusty Creek was growing, slowly but genuinely, and the school was part of that growth, and she felt the weight of it in the good way, the way you feel the weight of something worth carrying. By 1885, the Kendrick Ranch had expanded modestly, adding a section of land to the north that came available when an older rancher named Whitfield decided to retire to live closer to his children in Dallas. Roscoe negotiated the purchase himself, carefully, with the accountant's precision he had been developing since the Friday afternoon sessions, and when the papers were signed and the land was his, he showed Anna the survey map spread across the kitchen table and traced the new boundary with his finger, and she traced it with him and said, "The north line makes much more sense now," and he agreed, and they stood over that map together in the kitchen light, and she thought about the fact that this land was theirs, which was still a thought that required a moment to settle into. She was expecting again by the fall of 1885, and this time the news was received with the particular combination of joy and practice competence that comes from having done something once and understanding what it requires. Gideon, who was 18 months old and extremely opinionated about the world, was beginning to form words, and his first fully formed opinion was that the cat who lived in the stable was more interesting than anything else on the property, which the cat appeared to resent. Their daughter arrived in April of 1886 in the same Tuesday morning fashion as her brother, and they named her Clara, which was both the name of Anna's grandmother and, as Roscoe noted with a faint smile, the name of the first teacher whose contract he had broken, a coincidence they could afford to find amusing now. Clara Kendrick was quieter than her brother from the first day, watchful in the way some children are, taking in the world before deciding what to do about it, and Anna recognized the quality because she had been that kind of child herself and knew its value. The town of Dusty Creek had settled into its relationship with the Kendrick family, the way towns settle into relationships with their anchor families, which is to say, with a mixture of familiarity and continued interest. Mabel Greer had never quite gotten over the satisfaction of the whole thing and brought it up at intervals in the way people bring up predictions that came true. The school was doing well. The ranch was doing well. Pete Calloway had a permanent look of vindicated quiet about him, and Doris ran the kitchen with the authority of someone who knows she is indispensable and is secure in it. It was in the summer of 1886 that they had the conversation that had been waiting since October of 1882, or perhaps since May of 1882, or perhaps since the morning Anna stepped off the stagecoach, and a woman in a blue calico dress came running across the street with a warning she had no way of knowing was entirely beside the point. They were on the porch as they always were for the important conversations, and Gideon was asleep inside and Clara was in her basket between them, and the evening was long and golden in the way of Texas summers, and Anna said, "I was thinking about May." "May of when?" Roscoe asked. "May of 1882, she said, "when I arrived." He was quiet for a moment. "What about it?" "I was thinking about Mabel Greer," she said, "and her very thorough accounting of your history, and about the fact that I told her I had not sent a contract and was not making promises." "I remember," he said. "I was right," she said, "in the most literal sense, but I was also wrong about something." He looked at her. "What were you wrong about?" "I thought I was being practical," she said. "I thought I was protecting myself from a set of expectations that might not be met. I was framing it in terms of what I was not doing, rather than thinking about what I was actually walking toward." "And what were you walking toward?" She looked at him in the long evening light, this man who had told her the truth on the first night and kept telling it, who had held her hand on a cold December porch and built her a life out of work and honesty and the particular grace of someone who knows what he has broken and is careful not to break the things that matter. "This," she said simply. "All of this. I just did not know it yet." He was quiet for a moment, and then he reached over and found her hand in the gathering dusk, the same way he had on that December night, certain and warm. "Neither did I," he said, "but I am very glad we both arrived at it." She leaned her head against his shoulder, which was not a thing she did often, not because she did not want to, but because she had always been someone who held herself upright, and the leaning was a choice she made deliberately when she made it. And he always seemed to understand that, because he sat very still when she did it, the way you sit still when something has come to rest near you that you do not want to disturb. Clara made a small sound in her basket, and Gideon could be heard inside beginning to wake from his afternoon sleep with the immediate urgency that was his characteristic manner, and the ranch was making its evening sounds around them, and the land went on to the horizon in every direction, wide and golden and entirely real. The years settled into their shape after that, the way good things settle, not with fanfare but with the accumulating weight of days that are mostly ordinary and entirely worth living. The school grew and Anna taught it until 1889, when the town had grown enough to warrant 2 teachers, and she trained the second one herself, a young woman named Margaret from Houston who was 21 and capable, and who took to the work the way Anna had hoped she would. Anna continued to manage the accounts on Friday afternoons, and the study door remained open, and Roscoe continued to present her with the ledger books with the expression of a man who has learned, late, the particular value of asking for help from the right person. The ranch prospered in the modest, durable way that ranches prosper when they are run by people who understand what they have and do not trade it for what looks shiny from a distance. Tom Briggs, who was 20 by 1889, had left the Patterson farm and was working as a deputy in the next county, which Anna heard about from his mother, and which did not surprise her at all, since Tom Briggs had always been someone who needed to understand things from the ground up and then apply them with purpose. Pete Calloway retired from active ranch work in 1890 at the age of 58 and moved into the small house that Roscoe had built for him at the northern edge of the property, which Pete had initially said was unnecessary, and then accepted with the grace of a man who is moved by more than he can easily say. He still came to supper twice a week, and managed the books of the horse breeding operation that had been added to the ranch's enterprises in 1888, because retirement for Pete Calloway was a matter of degree rather than kind. Gideon Kendrick grew into a boy who was his grandfather in miniature, methodical and quiet and deeply interested in how things worked, and by the time he was 7, he could name every horse on the property, and had begun following Roscoe through the daily ranch rounds, with the focused attention of an apprentice who knows he is learning something important. Roscoe taught him with the patience he brought to everything he considered worth doing properly, and watching them together, father and son, moving through the paddocks and the pastures in the early morning light, Anna felt the particular fullness of a life that has become what you did not know you wanted. Clara Kendrick was quieter than her brother and more observant, and at 7 she had already shown a gift for arithmetic that Anna recognized with a pleasure that was both maternal and professional. She sat in on the Friday account sessions by invitation from the age of 6, not to participate but to watch, and her watching had the quality of someone filing things away for future use. In the spring of 1891, Anna Atwood Kendrick stood in the door of the schoolhouse that she had first entered 9 years before and looked at the wooden floor and the 4 glass windows and the slightly dented globe that was still on the teacher's desk. And she felt the full weight of the years in the best way, which is to say not as something pressing down but as something solid beneath her feet. Margaret was teaching the class now, and teaching it well, and the children were bent over their slates with the same mix of willing and reluctant attention that every generation of children brings to the work. And the stove was going because April in Texas is unpredictable, and the room smelled of chalk and wood smoke, and the particular warm dust of a place that has been well used. She walked back to the ranch house in the mid-morning, which she rarely did on school days but could now, because she was no longer the teacher in that room, only its former steward, and the walk between the schoolhouse and the ranch was the same quarter-mile of dirt road it had always been, with the paddock fences on either side and the sound of horses and the smell of hay and leather and dry Texas air. Roscoe was on the porch, sitting in his chair, apparently reading something, which was a newer habit and one she was fond of. He looked up when she came up the path, and his face did the thing it always did, the opening, the becoming of itself rather than its working version, and she had never gotten tired of seeing that. She sat in her chair, and they were quiet together for a while. "I was thinking," she said eventually, "about Mabel Greer." He turned a page of his reading. "What about her?" "She warned me that first morning," Anna said. "About you, about the contracts and the promises. She was very thorough." "You have mentioned this before," he said, not unkindly. "I know," she said, "but I keep thinking about what she thought she was doing. She thought she was protecting me from making the same mistake the others had made. She thought the information was a warning." "And it was," he said. "And it was," she agreed. "Just not about the thing she thought it was about." He set the reading down and looked at her. "What was it a warning about?" She thought about it for a moment, looking out at the land, at the new green coming up in the south pasture, and the horses moving in the western paddock and the sky above it all. As enormous and extravagant as it had been the first evening, she arrived and stood at the window of the west room and looked at it. "It was a warning," she said, "that you were someone who needed to be taken as exactly who you were, rather than fitted into a form that other people had designed. The women who left, they were not wrong to leave. The contracts made sense for what they expected. But the problem was not you specifically. It was the mismatch between what was written down and what the actual life of this place required. And I happened to arrive without writing anything down, so there was nothing to mismatch." He was looking at her with the wide, open expression. "You have been thinking about this for 9 years. "I think about most things for 9 years," she said. He did the laugh again, the real one, the full sudden one that she had first heard on the December evening, and that she had come to consider one of the genuinely great sounds in the world. It was not a frequent laugh, which was part of why it was so good when it came. She reached across and put her hand in his, the way he had first done on the December porch, and he held it the way he had held it every time since, with the certainty of a man who knows the value of what is in his hand. "No contracts," he said. "No promises," she said. "Just this," he said. "Just this," she agreed, and the Texas spring was around them, and their children were inside the house, and the land was good, and the sky was enormous, and everything was exactly as it was supposed to be, which is the rarest and most complete condition a life can achieve, and they both knew it, and neither of them said anything more, because some things are complete enough that words are the smaller version of them, and the larger version is simply to sit in them together. In the long good quiet of a life well made.